Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading Numbers chapter 16. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord? And when Moses heard it, he fell upon his face. And he spake unto Korah, and unto all his company, saying, Even tomorrow the Lord will shew who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come near unto him, even him whom he hath chosen will he cause to come near unto him. This do, take your censers, Korah, and all his company, and put fire therein, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord doth choose, he shall be holy. Ye take too much upon you, ye sons of Levi. And Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi. Seemeth it but a small thing unto you, that the God of Israel hath separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister unto them? And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee. And seek ye the priesthood also? For which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron, that ye murmur against him? And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, We will not come up. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of a land that floweth with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us? Moreover, thou hast not brought us into a land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. And Moses was very wroth, and said unto the Lord, Respect not thou their offering. I have not taken one ass from them, neither have I hurt one of them. And Moses said unto Korah, Be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron, tomorrow. And take every man a censer, and put incense in them, and bring ye before the Lord every man a censer, 250 censers, thou also, and Aaron, each of you a censer. And they took every man his censer, and put fire in them, and laid incense thereon, and stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell upon their faces, and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with all the congregation? And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the congregation, saying, Get you up from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went unto Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. So they got up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moses said, Hereby ye shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of mine own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up, with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all those words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them. And the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They, and all that appertaineth to them, went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, Lest the earth swallow us up also. And there came out a fire from the Lord, and consumed the 250 men that offered incense. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, that he take up the censers out of the burning, and scatter thou the fire yonder, for they are hallowed. The censers of these sinners against their own souls, let them make them broad plates for a covering of the altar, for they offer them before the Lord. Therefore they are hallowed, and they shall be a sign unto the children of Israel. And Eleazar the priest took the brazen censers, wherewith they that were burnt had offered, and they were made broad plates for a covering of the altar, to be a memorial unto the children of Israel, that no stranger, which is not of the seed of Aaron, come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he be not as Korah and as his company, as the Lord said to him by the hand of Moses. But on the morrow all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, Ye have killed the people of the Lord. And it came to pass, when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Get you up from among this congregation, that I may consume them as in a moment. And they fell upon their faces. And Moses said unto Aaron, Take a censer, and put fire therein from off the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly unto the congregation, and make an atonement for them, for there is wrath gone out from the Lord, the plague is begun. And Aaron took as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people. And he put on incense, and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. Now they that died in the plague were 14,700, beside them that died about the matter of Korah. And Aaron returned unto Moses unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the plague was stayed. Summarizing Numbers chapter 16. Men named Korah, Dathan, Abiram gathered 250 men to go against Moses and Aaron. In verse 2, these people that came against them were mentioned as being men of renown, princes, men that had clout in their community. 250 of them came up against Moses and Aaron. And so basically they were accusing Moses and Aaron of bringing them out of Egypt so that they can exalt themselves over the Israelites and make themselves some sort of prince. So Moses falls on his face, tells the men that God will choose who he wants to be near him the next day. In verse 6, Moses tells them to put fire and incense in censers and tells them that the Levites have gone too far. Verses 8, 9, and 10, Moses asked Korah, why weren't they satisfied with their special status? And Moses even asked them, does it seem like a small thing that God gave the Levites this special status? And verse 10, he asked the men, do you want the priesthood also? So the Levites in Numbers chapter 3, they were separated, and let me just make sure. Okay, yes, so in Numbers chapter 3, the Levites were separated as the firstborn or as a special group of people to God. And they were separated from the Israelites. They were to complete tasks in the tabernacle. So they were like church officials, tabernacle officials. They were under the direction of Aaron's son in Numbers chapter 3. So they already have the special status, and the only thing that they're not able to do is the specific duties of the priests. So Aaron and his sons, they have certain things that they do, And Moses is asking them, do you want the priesthood also in addition to this special status? Verse 12, Moses sent for the other two men, Dathan and Abiram, who refused to meet him. They respond, asking, "Isn't it enough that you took us from a prosperous land to kill us in the wilderness and to make yourself a prince?" So they're accusing him of bringing all these people into the wilderness to feed his ego. And then tells Moses, "You didn't bring us into a prosperous land." Verse 15, Moses was angry or wroth. Moses was angry and wroth, and he tells God not to respect their offering. He tells God he hasn't taken a donkey from them, he hasn't harmed them. Verse 16, Moses tells Korah to bring all his people to meet with him and Aaron the following day in front of God. In verse 17, he says, "Every man bring your censer with the incense." So the 250 men and Moses and Aaron were all going to go to the tabernacle and stand in it, and God was going to show who he wanted near him. God's glory came into the tabernacle, presenting in front of the entire congregation. In verse 20 and 21, God tells Aaron and Moses to separate themselves so that he can consume the entire congregation. Verse 22, Moses and Aaron humbly, have to fall on their face. That's like a display of humbleness. And they're asking God not to punish everyone for the sin of one man or the sin of a few men. Korah seems like the ringleader, but don't punish all for the few. Verse 23, God instructs Moses to tell the 250 men in the congregation to separate themselves from the Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, the leaders of the 250 men. And Moses also instructs the crowd to not touch any of their possessions. Verse 27, the congregation left Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood on the doors of their tents with their wives and children. Verse 28 through 30, Moses declares that he did not do things on his own will as a leader. He continues, explaining that a natural death for these men means Moses was not commanded by God. But if the earth swallowed these men up, then they're guilty of treating God with contempt. Verse 31 through 33. The earth opened up to swallow the men. Have you ever been swallowed? No. The earth opened up to, the Bible says to swallow them up. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed the men up, and their households and all their possessions, and the earth closed and they vanished. Verse 34. Israel ran, scared that they might also get swallowed up too. Yeah, the Bible says it. The Bible says that the Israelites were afraid that they would get swallowed as the other men were swallowed. So I am not saying this. I mean, I am saying it, but the Bible is saying it. So verse 35, fire came from God that devoured the 250 men who offered incense under Korah's leadership. Verse 36 and 37, God tells Moses to tell Aaron's oldest son, Eleazar, scatter the coals far away, take the priestly censers, and censers are fire containers. Take the priestly censers from the fire. Those censers are hallowed or sacred. And then in verse 38, God instructs Moses to tell Eleazar to take the censers of the sinners, of the 250 men, and use them as plating for the altar. This will be a warning or a memorial, a reminder to Israel that only Aaron's relatives or descendants should be offering incense to the Lord, and that is seen here in verse 40. Okay, only Aaron's relatives are to do that. Eleazar obeyed the instruction. This was done to reinforce God's command. Israel murmured, accusing Moses of killing these people as well. Israel congregated against Moses and Aaron again, and the cloud covered the tabernacle. The Lord's glory appeared. Verse 43. Moses and Aaron appeared before the congregation. Verse 44 through 45. God tells Moses again to get up, get away from the congregation so he can consume Israel. They fell on their face, which is the display of humbleness, again out of reverence. And then in verse 46, Moses tells Aaron to 1. Take a censer, take a fire container, put fire in it from the altar, put on incense, go into the congregation and make an atonement for the people because a plague began to spread. Aaron did as Moses asked, stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. So in verse 49, 14,700 people ended up dying because of this incident with Korah. So that's including the plague, the earth, the earth swallowing the people, the plague, and the fire. So altogether, 14,700 people, and Aaron's atonement for Israel is what stopped the plague. So, some of the highlights. The first thing that I noticed that I keep asking myself, instead of leaving the congregation, the dissidents, they want to create mutiny and they want to become insubordinate. The Israelites are in the wilderness, and if they're unhappy with the way Moses is running things and they don't believe God is inspiring them, they are capable, or they're not bound by any type of laws or anything. So they're able to just leave. If they want to go back to Egypt because they think it was better there, they can just go back to Egypt. But they won't. Instead, they want to do this. Another thing that I noticed, Korah, in chapter 16, verse 1, there were 4 names mentioned. So we have Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and On. But we don't see any more about On after the first verse. Not quite sure why. So then after that, it's just 3 main people. Maybe he just fell off because he was like, maybe he just saw enough to not want to get involved in that. Verse 12, we see that Dathan and Abiram did not want to face Moses and Aaron. So the next thing that I noticed, Israel continues to take instruction from Moses. Even these 250 men and the 3 ringleaders, they all continue to take direction from Moses, even after they say they don't believe him, they don't trust him. And we see that because in verse 21, God tells Moses, verses 16 through 20, maybe that's where I should have went through. So 16 through 20, Moses tells everyone to stand in the tabernacle, and they all go. Moses continues to advocate for the people who go against him and Aaron. I feel like that point was a little bit rushed. Well, as I was saying, Israel continues to take instruction from Moses. So when he said, hey, let's meet in the tabernacle, they all met in the tabernacle. When he said, bring your censers, bring the fire, they did what Moses said, even as they were going against Moses. And then when he told them, hey, step away from these 3 men, they stepped away from the 3 men. So, I mean, even though they wanted to buck, they still had some kind of respect for Moses enough to listen to him anyway, even during this conflict, right? I'm going to stop saying right, I don't like it. Okay, so the next point I want to make, the clear next point, Moses continues to advocate for the people that go against him and Aaron. In verse 15, Moses tells God to not respect their offering. He was very upset. But then in verse 21, when God tells them to separate themselves so he can consume Israel, Moses and Aaron advocate for them. And then in verse 41, Israel accuses Moses of killing the 250 people that died. And then in verses 46 through 48, Moses tells Aaron to make an atonement for Israel from the plague, which he did. So he's still trying to make an atonement, trying to make what's the word? He's still trying to stave off God's wrath, even though the Israelites are wrong and they're coming against them. One other point I want to make, Moses gives God the space to settle discrepancies. In verses 1 through 3, the people question Moses' leadership in an accusatory manner, saying that this was all for him to make a name for himself. In verses 6 through 15, he had a conversation with Korah and with the men, inquiring about the problem. In verses 16 through 17, Moses gives them sort of this fair way of saying, hey, let's go to the tabernacle. You bring your 250 men, bring your censers. We'll all stand in the tabernacle and we'll see what happens. Moses is demonstrating a sense of fairness by inviting them all to stand before God. One question or one thought that I had when I was reading this is sometimes I question a little bit about God leading Moses, how this is written, because again, Moses is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. So this situation, this is Moses writing this down. So even though I believe that this was a work that was inspired by God, we are human. And so as a human being, especially if you're not really aware of it, it's very difficult to communicate an incident without being biased. So that's just something that I keep questioning about Moses, because we see here in verse 5, the men tell Moses that they think he's attempting to make a name for himself instead of truly following God. When we look at verses 6 through 7, Moses tells them to come to the tabernacle the next day. And did God tell Moses to tell them to come to the tabernacle? You know what I mean? God didn't instruct them in verses 6 through 7 to, come to the tabernacle and bring your censers and offer an incense. He didn't tell him to do that. And then in verse 15, we look at Moses telling God, don't accept their offering, don't honor their offering. So why would, do you really have the authority to tell God not to accept something? Verses 16 through 19, Moses lays out the method to settle the dispute. And again, this is not specified by God. We look at verses 20 through 21. God specifically instructs Moses on what to do right now. Then we look at verses 23 to 24. God specifically instructs Moses. When we look at some of these other parts in the Bible, God didn't instruct Moses. Moses seems to kind of just come up with it. So we look at verses 28 through 33. God did not specifically instruct Moses to give the command of the earth consuming the insubordinates. So when Moses stood there and he said, hey, if I didn't lead you, then you'll have a natural death. But if I am leading you under the authority of God, then the earth is going to swallow you. And that part, okay? God didn't specifically instruct Moses here. When we look at verses 28 through 33, Moses is talking, and God didn't instruct them the same way. When we look at, verse 20 through 21, the Lord spake unto Moses, and the Lord spoke unto Moses. But when we look at verse 28, do you see what I mean? Moses just came and he's saying this in the name of God. So this is something that I just wonder. I've noticed that Moses has done this a few times up until this point, and him being the writer, this being from his perspective, this is just something that I am considering. Then we look at verses 36 through 38. Again, the Lord spake unto Moses about the censer, to take the holy censers and preserve them, take the censers of the sinners and use it to plate the altar. Then we look at verses 44 and 45. The Lord spoke unto Moses again. And then when we look here at verse 46, Moses says to Aaron, take your censer. But do you see what I mean? God didn't tell him to take a censer and make an atonement. So that's just something that I think about. Or, it's just something that I'm considering as I'm reading. The very last point that I want to make, Moses is not a dignitary. Moses does not have a title. Moses is not a religious official. He is not a pastor. He is not a priest. Moses is still the plug, though. And in order for Aaron to move, God speaks to Aaron through Moses. Aaron has the title of the priest, so he's like a preacher. The Levites, they are the religious officials. These men that were coming against Moses were men with good reputations, men that were the Levites. So these were the men that were serving in church. So I just want to point that out because just because someone has a title doesn't necessarily mean that they mean more to God or anything, or that God speaks to them more or anything like that. Moses he doesn't even participate in any of the offering ceremonies. So that's just something I want to point out. He has no specific position in the tabernacle. And Moses instructed those with titles and reputations during this conflict, and they listened to him. So that's all for chapter 16, and the next upload will be chapter 17. Thank you for watching.